Welcome to our presenter this evening, Ken Dombrowski. Ken has presented for us many, many times on many fascinating topics. Uh, Ken is local to our area and has many interests, has presented on films and now tonight on the architecture of where films may be shown as well as other entertainment, the movie palaces, theater meccas of historic Chicago. Hi, Ken.
Hello,
Welcome.
Aaron. Thank you, and it's great to be back. And hopefully, I'll have another exciting topic here that I'll walk through for the next hour. And we're going to talk about a lot of history here and a lot of different uh, unique movie palaces and theater meccas, all linked to Chicago. These theaters, they're not just buildings, they're actually living pieces of history, and each with its own story to tell. So, whether you're a film buff or a history enthusiast or someone looking for a unique night out, the Chicago Old Movie Houses offers a lot of magical escape from the ordinary. And there's kind of an allure about these historic theaters. And, why are they so special? Well, they offer an experience that goes beyond watching a film. The architectural grandeur, the vintage decor, and the rich history envelope the moment you step through the doors. And I'm going to talk about some of these. I'm going to talk about some of the major ones, the early ones, and I'm going to give you an update of what's kind of going on today with some of the old ones that are sort of still standing. They serve as cultural landmarks and they preserve the artistic and social heritage of the time. And for younger generations, they're now offering us a glimpse of the past while the older patrons they can revel in the nostalgia. So let's take a look at some of these timeless theaters. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the very beginning. We're going to go back into Chicago, and we're going to go back into early 1900s. And at the time, this was the boom of the new innovation at the time. The new innovation was Nickelodeon, and the Nickelodeon was a machine. You can kind of see it over there on the left. You'd view in there, and the pictures would move, and mostly short films, but it would be like 10 to 20 minutes. But the Nickelodeons here started to be located in large urban centers and kind of in building spaces, and they would offer programs in all different topics. And by 1906, they called them the Nickel Theaters. They were the industry's dominant exhibition outlets. By the 1907, the late period here, there was an explosion of Nickelodeons in the Chicago Loop and the near North Side and West Side. And with the rise of immigration from 1890 to 1910 in Chicago, the silent movies with their universal visual language were the best and cheapest forms of entertainment. And in the early days of cinema, movies were seen as a very cheap entertainment for a lot of those lower classes. Um, and in an effort to attract a more affluent clientele, the theater owners in cities not only in Chicago but starting across America, they started to build movie palaces. Um, they were larger and more ornate, and they rather than those cramped Nickelodeons, and it kind of tied into at the time vaudeville and vaudeville with the plays and the staging. They would do a combination of movies into vaudeville. So we're going to talk a little bit about the first big movie palaces, and the first one dates back to 1907. And here's a picture on the left of the Orpheum Theater. And the Orpheum Theater was located at 112 South State Street. And this was really a great boost for moving pictures because the owners kind of figured out that they had certain allocated space, and they figured out that, hey, we could show a large movie and dedicate all these seats rather than filling them up with all these little Nickelodeons. So thus, the movie palace was kind of created. And when the Orpheum Theater opened in September 9th of 1907, it was one of the combination largest vaudeville houses and movie houses in the Loop, and it seated about 800 people. Um, it would feature continuous vaudeville and continuous movies from 9 in the morning to at least 11 at night. And it would just run continuously, just stopping to let one audience in and audience out and the other audience in. And you can see the facade was just stunning. It was a masterpiece in Beaux Arts architecture, and it was one of the most beautiful theater facades in Chicago history. There was a two-story archway, as you can see in the picture, that was capped by a figure of a goddess and was illuminated by electric lights and sparkling white terracotta, meaning to resemble marble. And over the arch, there was a seashell pattern that radiated outwards from the terracotta peacock in the center. Um, and I'm going to make a comment here. Some of the pictures you're going to see today, a lot of them are kind of not high resolution. They're kind of grainy. It was just the times of the photos. This one was a little bit, I think, upgraded, but as you go through the presentation, you'll kind of see some of that. So I just wanted to point that out. But this was a privately owned theater, and it was sold to the Warner Brothers in 1920, and it continued to operate till about 1937. And unfortunately, this treasure of the early movie theater architecture ended up turning into a business model by they decided to tear it down, and actually over the years it became a shoe store, a Burger King restaurant, and currently a menswear store. So some of the examples I'm going to give you, unfortunately, the architecture is not there, and all we have to capture some of these theaters is the photos. The second one, and this one is still standing, but it's kind of a small little one. It's called the Mercury Theater, and this is at 3745 Southport, and this is in the kind of Lincoln Park area, and it's started as a Nickelodeon, and it turned into a theater that would show silent films, but it was started back in 1912. The building is located a few doors down from the landmark Music Box Theater on trendy Southport Avenue, and I'll kind of talk about Music Box later. And this theater ended up getting closed in March of 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was announced at that time that it was going to close permanently, but they decided that in 2021, they converted the building over into, that's a recent picture there on the right. It's a theater playhouse, and it's a special events venue. But this was one of the first theaters in Chicago dating back to 1912. The next one that's really gone through a lot of changes was the Elvin Theater, and this just is a history of that's one of the original pictures there shown on the left, upper left, and this was in Chicago's Westtown neighborhood. It opened in 1914. It's at 1612 West Chicago, and it operated all the way up through the 1970s. And by the 1970s, as the neighborhood started to change, this movie house started to show a lot of Spanish language movie theaters. It actually started to get converted after that point as the movie business and the frequency kind of died down. And it ended up getting converted into a clothing store that you can see there in the lower left. And then it was actually a ballroom called the Shapiro Ballroom, shown there in the lower right. And then finally, today, there's a recent picture of there up right. It still stays standing, the building's standing. There's a different facade in the front, but that now has become an art gallery called Patron at 1612 West Chicago. Luckily for us, this theater here, built in 1914, has really stood the test of time, and it's become a really significant landmark. And that is the Biograph Theater, which is 2433 North Lincoln. Even though the Biograph sign is still there in the front, you'll see it's been changed to Victory Gardens Theater. Over the last several years, this now is a venue for a lot of drama plays coming to Chicago. Recent running was a David Mamet play. The new Henry Johnson play with David Mamet was shown here. And most of the structure on the street dates back to the late 1890s, and they're mostly four-story buildings with stores on the ground floor. And the theater was named the Biograph because it was actually a very common name for a lot of movies in that era. It was just kind of a very popular name. The building facade features a generous amount of windows, as you can see. That's an updated picture there on the right. And at street level, all of the storefront has large display windows. And above, you'll kind of see some beautiful 10 arcade openings with multi-paneled windows. It's just a really beautiful building. Um, in the 1930s, this theater got remodeled, and there was a marquee and a ticket booth that were added to the front uh, to kind of modernize it in the 1930s. And later on, they've decided to keep that freestanding ticket booth. It's no longer in use, but it's kind of still there as you walk in because they're doing plays there. Well, of course, I'm thinking a lot of you know that this movie just becomes a legendary Chicago place because what it ended up happening is on July 22nd in 1934, a movie was playing, Manhattan Melodrama, with Clark Gable, William Powell, and Myrna Loy, and it was really a very popular show, but very popular by the gangster John Dillinger. And John Dillinger decided to go see this movie with the Lady in Red, and it turned into a sting operation. So right out in the front of this theater on July 22nd, 1934, um, pretty much the FBI took down John Dillinger. You can kind of see a little diagram there in the upper right, but when he came out of the Biograph Theater, he started running to his left, and he ended up getting gunned down a little bit down the block near the alleyway. Over there on the left is an actual picture of the night of the shooting. Fans just wanted to stand and get their pictures taken for that souvenir. And here's a picture of the Lady in Red, a newspaper clipping of John Dillinger. And and today, actually, the alleyway there by the Biograph Theater alley is actually known to be one of the most haunted places in Chicago. And the artists have taken liberties and put in murals there of John Dillinger and some of his famous quotations. And again, now this is completely the Victory Gardens Theater, but you'll see the signage has a combination of Victory Gardens and the Biograph. The next one here, this is a very old picture on the left. Uh, could not really get a nice high quality image there, but this is the Lakeshore. And the Lakeshore was at 3475 North Broadway, and it opened in 1915. This was a 525 seat Lakeshore Theater in Chicago's Lakeview neighborhood. And pretty much by the 1980s, this it kind of got faded and run down. Um, we're going to talk a little bit about how television kind of changed what happened with the movies in the 50s and 60s. But for those movies left standing, a lot of recession periods in the late 70s and early 80s really did a lot of these theaters in. But in April of 1988, this theater was actually renamed to what's called the Broadway Cinema because its location on the corner of Broadway and Belmont Avenue. And it was then closed down for a period of time through the 1990s. And in 2002, this theater reopened, and it was under the original name, the Lakeshore Theater, and it was used as a venue for live performances with an emphasis on comedy acts. And now, recently, over the past few years, this has become the branded Laugh Factory, 3175 North Broadway. The Laugh Factory, that building there is the Lakeshore Theater that was originally built in 1915. So as the movies, the movies were getting better and, they were still in its infancy, I wanted to kind of walk you through a little bit of what was kind of playing at the movies at the time. And here were the really great popular silent movies that all predated 1920. These were all done during the teens, the 19s. The big one there that's become an ultimate classic is The Birth of a Nation on the left. That's a movie poster from Birth of a Nation. This was also the time of Charlie Chaplin and the Tramp, the Great Train Robbery. Harold Lloyd, who is a famous comedian, did a lot of movies during that time period, and D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, and another movie there, Charlie Chaplin by the Sea on the right. And at the time, Chicago was very fortunate because we had the first movie studios. We were we were creating movies in Chicago before Hollywood was invented, and all these famous stars: Gloria Swanson, Charlie Chaplin, Colleen Moore, Wallace Beery, Bronco Billy Anderson did a lot of cowboy movies. Ben Turpin did a lot of comedy type movies, and Francis Bushman did a lot of action adventure, including Tarzan. We were very fortunate in Chicago to have all of these actors living here and making movies right um, on Argyle Street called S&A Studios. And there was a huge partnership at the time between people that want to invest in the movie theaters and people that want to invest in the motion pictures to kind of take everything to a whole different level. So the different levels started coming in the 1920s, and here was what was playing in the 1920s. The Jazz Singer on the left goes down in history as kind of the first talkie movie, but the Jazz Singer didn't come out really until the late 1920s, 1927. So pretty much everything prior to 1927, everything, all those movies, they were all done with no audio, no voice, just silent. So Charlie Chaplin's The Gold Rush, Buster Keaton's The General. Buster Keaton was, a great comedy person at the time. And we started getting into the introduction of some key stars. Over on the left, big hit was The Big Parade with John Gilbert, The Black Pirate there with Douglas Fairbanks Jr., the first movie directed by Alfred Hitchcock, The Lodger, and then over the start of Gary Cooper's career in movies like The Virginian. And all of these were your 1920s cinema. And so the theaters started to kind of get bigger and the movie palaces started to get bigger. And we're going to kind of talk through those big movie palaces. But a big part of the innovation of the movies and the creativity in the movies kind of really tied to it, the experience with the theater organs. Theater organs were being specially made for movie theater audiences. And here's a lot of pictures that basically show you what those theater organs look like. And they were multi-level keyboards and kind of like early kind of synthesizer, different types of sounds and music pedals. And this became the huge music score of the time. And the different movie palaces were competing even for what type of movie organs they were getting, how big, where they were coming from, what was the innovation. And we're going to talk a little bit about how the movie organs actually made or broke some of these theaters, depending on the acoustics and the sounds of how they were sounding throughout the theater. Over there on the right, there was a gentleman who was the most famous and popular organist during the heyday of the theater organ. And he built a huge following in Chicago, and his name was Jesse Crawford. There would be special people that would come in to basically be professional organists, and this would be their job as the creativity and the growth of all these movies were starting to come into place. His artistry kind of reached a worldwide audience, and he was christened as the poet of the organ. So now, as we started getting into the 1920s, there was a need for pretty much expansion and a need for bigger movie experiences. So that led to what I call the Balaban and Katz experience. And perhaps no two names in the Chicago movie theaters were better known than Balaban and Katz. And Balaban was actually a family of 7 brothers. There's 4 of them that are shown there. And over time, each of these brothers started doing a lot of management, even with different movie studios. The key brother, one of the leader brothers, was Abraham. That's his picture in the upper right hand there, Abraham Balaban, one of the brothers. And the cat's name comes from, it turns out that the Balaban brothers had one sister, and that sister married a guy by the name of Sam Katz. So Sam Katz became a partner with Balaban to become Balaban and Katz. The Balaban and Katz theaters, they partnered with the key architectures in Chicago. One of the main architecture firms at the time was Rapp and Rapp, and they were known for their ornate interiors and exteriors. They started into innovation with heating and air conditioning, plush carpeting, gilded fountains, original murals, and chandeliers. And all of this was really a godsend, especially with air conditioning too in the summers for Chicago, or the heating systems in the winter. It created a true escape experience. And in addition to the movie palaces that some of them we're going to talk about, they also created what was called an escape, and everything being all about service. Escape was kind of a key to the Balaban and Katz entertainment philosophy. And as the country kind of reeled from the Great Depression and the World War II, the Balaban and Katz moviegoers, for like a coin, they could take in at those days they combined vaudeville and stage shows, and then doing films, and then eventually as the films expanded, that's what discontinued the vaudeville circuit. And they had these professional ushers. Here's examples of how those ushers dressed. At the lower bottom, very elaborate concession stands. This is where the innovation of the concession stands came into play, where at the time you could, go buy whatever you needed to in the movie theaters. And then because you were always dealing with movies and the ushers constantly had to talk to each other, and you couldn't talk because you'd interrupt the movie, they came up with an innovation hand signal communication system. An example of that is in the upper right hand there, where they would use hand gestures and arm gestures, and that's how they really communicated through all this. So what I'm going to show you now is we're going to talk kind of about the 5 largest theaters of this time and experience. And the largest meaning, we're going to talk about it based on seating capacity. So there's actually a tie for 5th, and the first of the 5th, it was called the Granada. And the Granada was located at 6427 North Sheridan Road. And Granada was a 3,400 seat movie palace. It was in the Rogers Park neighborhood there. And the theater was originally designed for both live stage shows and movies. And it was located near an elevated train stop and a very large parking lot that could provide convenience for automobiles. The 3-story structure there that you see on the left and on the upper right, it was 92 feet tall. It had a 92-foot tall and a 93-foot wide marquee, that Granada marquee that would face west on Sheridan Road, and it was covered with thousands of electric lights, so just light up the whole neighborhood area. And there were marble staircases. I couldn't find a photo of that from the ticket lobby to the second floor, but you can see a picture of the ceiling and the elaborate inside. The ceiling was a large dome that was over 80 feet across, with smaller inset domes that were all ornamentation around the edges. And there were gold leaves that were covering the detailing of the ceiling. 3 large vaults were on each side of the balcony, and they were filled with glass and backlit blue lighting to represent a night sky. And that term, a night sky, we're going to refer to it, was was called an atmospheric design, trying to create some designs that were kind of tied to the elements of the earth or tied to the elements of the sky. This movie ends up being famous, and you might be thinking, like, why is there a movie poster of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest over there on the right-hand side? Well, it turns out that the world premiere of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was actually held here at the Granada Theater. and that was November 19th of 1975. And the whole cast was here: Jack Nicholson, Louise Fletcher. They all appeared in person, and that's where the world premiere was, at the Granada Theater. That's how elaborate the theater was, even dating into the 1970s. Um, it remained in really good condition until the early 19, maybe like the mid 1980s. And there was started to be problems with neighborhood vandalism and a lot of water infiltration that began to take its toll. One of the common elements that we're going to talk about with some of these theaters is pretty much the upkeep and maintenance. And a lot of the business owners at the time, they were deferring a lot of maintenance, but then it got to a point where it was almost uncoverable. The picture there in the lower center is what it looks like today. It's sort of retail space with a parking garages all along that area. But the unfortunate thing was the complete Granada there was completely torn down to make way for the kind of the retail space that you see today. Number five, the other tie was the Tivoli Theater. And this was on the south side of Chicago off of 63rd Street, 6329 Cottage Grove Avenue. Um, I've got several pictures of what that theater looked like. You could kind of see how elaborate it is. But the Tivoli Theater opened its doors in February of 1921, and it was the first of the movie palaces in the south side of Chicago, which is kind of the Woodlawn neighborhood area. This one was designed by Rapp and Rapp. It was very heavily ornate. You can see kind of everything's done in a French Baroque style, and it glittered with gold leaves and multicolored marble. Its soaring two-story high lobby was based on the Sainte Chapelle in Versailles, and the theater was stocked with a lot of antique sculptures and paintings. And the theater was also equipped with one of the most up-to-date modern amenities such as air conditioning and, at the time, state-of-the-art projection equipment. Um, by the 1950s, and the introduction of television, the theater started to kind of slow down, and the neighborhood started to change quite a bit. And there was a modernization that was done in the late 1950s to kind of recreate that theater experience going forward, but they just could not make it profitable, and they permanently had to close it in September 19th of 1963. And then, unfortunately, it got torn down. And the business model back in the time in 1960s and 1970s, there was a lot of expansion and a lot of need for grocery stores to come into Chicago, and grocery stores and parking. So the Tivoli got basically torn down, and it was replaced by a supermarket in a parking lot, which is there today. And that's kind of a common element of some of these older theaters from the business model standpoint. Number four was the Paradise Theater, and this one had 3,612 seats, and it was located at 231 North Crawford, which is Pulaski Avenue. And it was billed as the world's most beautiful theater. And at the corners of the auditorium, there were statues of trumpeting angels signaling the approach of Apollo, the sun god. I'll show you a picture here. Picture's a little fuzzy here, but this is what the inside looked like. And the statues of trumpeting angels signaling the approach of Apollo, the sun god, riding behind a team of marble carved horses as they raced across the sky. And the vestibule was equally spectacular here. It was adorned by marble statues and murals depicting the zodiac constellations on the ceiling high above. It was actually really a work of art. And the Paradise actually became immortalized by, you'll see the record album down there by Styx. And it was a triple platinum 1981 album that was immortalized by Styx that really talked a lot, and a lot of the songs were about the Paradise Theater. The theater's marquee was one of the largest ever raised in the city of Chicago. You can see that there on the upper left there. And it featured, again, a sunburst design, and it was studded with electric lights in 10 different colors. Um, when the hard economic times of the Depression started causing many Chicagoans to cut back on their trips to the shows, the business kind of slumped. And also, the advent of talking pictures kind of exposed flaws in the acoustic designs of the building. There was the huge dome ceiling that you see here in the upper right was really known to cause a lot of problems depending on where you sat. A lot of customers were complaining they couldn't hear the audio. The audio was bad. And unfortunately, they had to really shut it down in the early 1930s. They tried to renovate a little bit. They put in some new and modern sound equipment in the 1930s, but it never fully recovered and it didn't live up to the expectations. So finally, in 1956, there was a decision here by Bellabin and Katz. They decided to tear down the theater, and again, they sold this land to a supermarket chain. And the supermarket built on the site is long gone now, and now it's the site of an auto repair business. But there's really no architectural remnants left over with the Paradise. On a happier note, let's talk about the Chicago Theater, which is number 3. The Chicago Theater had 3,861 seats, and it was it's 175 North State Street. And I'm glad to report this one is still there in all its glory. This one was inspired by French elegance. Here's some original pictures of the Chicago Theater, the one on the left and the one on the right. But let's talk about some of the architecture. And these are recent shots of what the Chicago Theater looks like today. But a lot of this architecture and exterior was inspired by what's called tried to do the Wonder Theater, and it basically had a very Baroque style. The Chicago Theater's exterior features. It was meant to replicate the Paris Arc de Triomphe. You can kind of see it there above by the marquee there. It's faced in a glazed off-white terracotta brick, and the triumphal arch is actually 60 feet wide and 6 stories high. And it's hard to depict there in the picture on the right, but within that arch is the grand window, in which is set a circular stained glass panel bearing the coat of arms of the Bellabon and Katz chain, which is 2 horses holding ribbons of a 35 millimeter film in their mouth. This one was just very grand, and the interior of this is magnificent as well. It just can leave you breathless. There's elegant lobby, majestic staircases. There's the beautiful auditorium complex with murals above the stage and on the ceiling. And that's why was called the Wonder Theater of the World. The grand lobby was actually modeled after the Royal Chapel of Versailles, and it's 5 stories high, and it's actually surrounded by gallery promenades at the mezzanine and balcony levels. If you have not been to the Chicago Theater, I would recommend at some point trying to buy a ticket to the show. Unfortunately, you can't go in there. You just can't go randomly in there and take photos. These are not my photos. These are photos that I pulled off of the internet. But you can buy a ticket to the show and you can kind of see all of this. Today, this is mainly a venue for pretty much musical concerts. And the vertical shine of Chicago is actually 6 stories high, and it's one of the few such magnificent signs that are still in existence today. Luckily, in 1986, the Chicago Theater restoration, with the assistance of the city of Chicago, did save the theater, and they brought it back to all its glory to avoid demolition. And it reopened in 1986 as the musical venue, and the gala performance to open it was done by Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra came to Chicago. He was a performer at the Chicago Theater earlier in his career, but he came back in 1986 to rededicate the Chicago Theater. The number 2 one was the Marlboro, and the Marlboro was 4124 West Madison Street. It had 3,931 seats. It was located on West Madison Street and South Karloff Avenue, not far from the Paradise Theater. Um, but this one was built in kind of a Spanish Baroque style. It included a flamboyant terracotta facade, and the Marlborough Theater vowed first-time visitors with this massive stage and the procession arc you can see there. It had a soaring lobby. I couldn't find a photo of the lobby inside. Opening day was May 28th, 1927, and uh, the Marlborough Theaters eventually, by the 1950s, with the popularity of television again, they were struggling to keep this one filled, and the theater was actually torn down back in 1964. And some of this was kind of predating a lot of the National Historic Preservation. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Uh, that helps save some of the theaters that we have today. And speaking of trying to save a theater, let's talk about the number one crown jewel was the Uptown Theater at 4816 Broadway. This one had 4,381 seats. And for 50 years, this Uptown showed movies. And then after transitioned to a concert venue for a while. But pretty much, this was a Bell and Cast movie chain, but it was meant to really create a unforgettable experience, kind of create an escape from urban life in a very extravagant setting. Um, Again, the outside was kind of a Spanish Baroque revival facade. It had a luxurious six-story grand lobby, and it felt like you were entering in a palace. Over on the right, you can kind of see the dome, uh, how it is today, and you can see how run down it is because right now this is a vacant theater just kind of sitting there waiting to get renovated. But the dome is an example of this atmospheric design where you have a lot of bright colors, like a rainbow or sunshine, to kind of illuminate the natural elements of looking up at the sky. And the interior of this was just phenomenal. Here's some pictures of what that theater used to look like. The um, floating clouds, the twinkling ceiling lights, just a beautiful piece of work. And it eventually ended up in the 1950s trying to kind of recreate business. It ended up being the host for the show Queen for a Day. And this is where Queen for a Day was actually uh, filmed in front of a live audience in this theater from the 1950s to 1960s. And again, I excuse the fuzziness of some of these photos. A lot of photos that were taken were not really, high def. And here it is today. It's just sitting there, standing, and just completely dormant. And I'll kind of give you an update about it. But in the 1970s, this theater became a really live music venue, and it hosted numerous rock concerts with Grateful Dead, Genesis, Electric Light Orchestra, Rod Stewart, just a bunch of them. And unfortunately, in 1981, the theater suffered some major flood damage when a storm drain pipe froze and burst. And unfortunately, the business owners at the time basically decided to close the doors and not invest. And it's been sort of sitting there dormant since that time. It's landed on the Landmarks Preservation Council of Illinois' 10 most endangered places, and twice it was placed on the National Trust for Historic Preservation and Dangers list. So the good news is it's on an endangered list. Unfortunately, the current owners, which is Jam Productions, they're estimating that would cost probably $100 million to kind of repair the building, and there's a lot of effort trying to really renovate this one. If you have not seen it, I would recommend going to the neighborhood because it is really huge and it kind of stands out as a monument to Chicago. But unfortunately, it's kind of really getting run down, as you can see, with all the elements that are happening. So during the time period now, okay, those were our top five, but what was bringing all of these big theaters to life was the creation of the movies by there was pretty much five major studios from the golden age of Hollywood. You had Metro Goldwyn Mayer, 20th Century Fox, RKO, Warner Brothers, and Paramount uh, Theater. And each decade they were bringing more and more to try and just attract a lot of people in. And this is early before television. This is the place where you would go for entertainment. So what was playing was, let's look at the 1930s. Didn't capture them all, but kind of the big ones were you started getting into the Cary Grant movies. Example, The Awful Truth on the left. You had Fay Ray and King Kong in the late 1930s. You had the drama, The Women with Norma Shearer, Joan Crawford, and Rosalind Russell. And you had, what we consider our classics today all came out for the first time in the movie theaters, and you could just imagine seeing them on the big screen. Walt Disney's animated masterpiece, Snow White, Spencer Tracy's kicking off his career. One of the movies was Captain's Courageous, Errol Flynn in the classic Robin Hood movie, and then you have Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers in Top Hat, and on and on. And pretty much the late 1930s, 1939 was known as pretty much one of the biggest years in movies. With you had Frank Capra's It Happened One Night, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the unforgettable masterpiece Gone with the Wind, and of course the unforgettable masterpiece The Wizard of Oz. All of these you could go and just have that huge theatrical experience at these beautiful big Bella Bonnet Cats movies. And then you got into the 1940s, and here was what was showing in the 1940s. Again, huge masterpieces today: Casablanca, Meet Me in St. Louis, Double Indemnity, It's a Wonderful Life, which did not do well when it first came out, but now is a masterpiece. Big musical numbers like On the Town, and also movies like Citizen Kane, uh, Irving Berlin's Easter Parade, The Treasures of the Sierra Madre, Philadelphia Story, and Gilda. I'm not naming them all. I'm sorry if I missed one of your favorites, but this was just shows you what the quality was of these movies that you could go and see this at the Bella Bonnet Cats. So with that came the growth of the Chicago Theater District, which was off of Randolph Street. And the two pictures on the left there kind of show what it looked like in its day. And there was several theaters down there. It was pretty much the big theater district, and we're going to talk about a few of these. Over on the right today, that's a picture of what it looks like today. The same picture on the left. The Cadillac Palace Theater is still standing. It was one of the original theaters. That one's still there, and actually, it was called the New Palace Theater. Um, this venue was kind of an exciting vaudeville history. It opened in 1926, but then when vaudeville began to die down in the early 1930s, this one took off with all the movies that were showing at the Cadillac. Here's some pictures of the Cadillac Palace, and the inside is just really just beautiful, um, with all of the different intricacies. Just a beautiful place to go see the movies. Sorry for the grainy pictures in this one, but this was the old Woods Theater and was opened. It was on Randolph Street. It opened in 1918, and the exterior of the Woods Theater was designed in Venetian Renaissance style. Kind of the interior was a mix of Middle Eastern and Oriental styles. And from the late 1920s into early 1930s, the theater was known as RKO Woods Theater because they partnered with RKO Pictures. But by the 1970s, the Woods Theater began to decline, like a lot of others, with the recession at the time, and it was playing mostly like action and horror films. And the Cineplex Odeon bought the Woods Theater in the mid 1980s, and they attempted to kind of clean it up, and they tried to show first one for the first time in many years, but unfortunately it was just too late for the Woods Theater, so they permanently closed it in January of 1989, and they actually tore it down in the 1989. And there was a huge plan to build a huge, large office tower at this site, which never came to fruition. But fortunately, much later, and if you go down there, this is part of the Goodman Theater. The Goodman Theater did a lot of expansion, and they took off over the area here that was the Woods Theater. Another Randolph Street theater was originally called the Schiller, and then later turned into the Garrick. And here's some pictures of the Garrick. And this theater building was actually designed by Lewis and Sullivan and Dagmar Adler for the German Opera Company. They were going to do German operas here, and it opened up. And when it opened up, it was actually one of the tallest buildings in Chicago, and it was a 1,300 seat opera theater. And it's considered one of the greatest collaborations between Adler and Sullivan. When it opened in 1891, it was projected, it was being used for German language operas and cultural events. We had a huge a population of German immigrants. And in the late 1980s, it kind of ceased the German performances and it started doing the movies. And the 1930s, it was converted to the movie theater, and then it became a television studio in 1950. And it ended up, unfortunately, because of the economic times and the introduction of television, this whole area got torn down in 1961. And today there's a lot of little retail shopping centers there. And then we had the Apollo Theater. The Apollo Theater was opened in 1921 in a neoclassical Chicago architectural style. You'll see there over there on the left and the right. Again, these pictures are a little bit grainy, but it turned out that in 1927, the Apollo Theater was sold to the United Artists Corporation so that United Artists could show their pictures. And for the last few years of operation, it was in the middle to late 80s, it was part of the Cineplex Odeon movie chains that were becoming very popular. But unfortunately, not only was this theater torn down in 1991, but pretty much they wiped the whole block away at the time. In the 90s, Chicago was preparing for a huge office and retail complex to be designed by one of the newer architects, Helmut John, and it never materialized. It was called Block 37, and this area remained vacant for almost 20 years. But then several redevelopment plans have kind of come and gone. And by 2012, the site is now occupied by the studios of Channel 2. CBS's Chicago affiliate is over there. Now, one piece of part of the Randolph experience was the Oriental Theater, and this is a staple in Chicago history. The Oriental was built on the site of the Iroquois Theater, and we're going to talk about the Iroquois Theater in a minute. But anyway, this theater, the Oriental, kind of changed names over the years. Today, this is the Netherlander Theater, which was kind of the original Iroquois Theater, which became the Oriental Theater, then became the Ford Center for the Performing Arts. So it kind of was going through quite a transition. But luckily, they pretty much preserved the building, and you can kind of see in the front of the building there in the center some of that sculptured artistic pieces above the main marquee. The building is unfortunately legendary for the Great Theater fire, which occurred in 1903. And this was the place where at the Iroquois they were showing a production of Mr. Bluebeard, and they overpacked the capacity. It was a new theater that was supposed to be fireproof, but they didn't have all of the fireproofing inside. And unfortunately, this whole building ended up getting burned down. And with it comes a lot of legendary Chicago stories, which is referred to as the Alley of Death. People try to escape into the back escapes of the movie theater, and more than 600 people fell to their death. And it's called the Alley of Death, and it's one of the most haunted places in Chicago. Today, they've Chicago's kind of recreated this alley, and the Alley of Death here is nonstop ghost tours. It's got murals showing there on the bricks right behind the Netherlander Theater. And you can see that this alley, there's an entranceway on State Street, and it kind of goes all the way back to the other side behind the theater. So what really happened in 1950s was the technology of television, and here are some, advertisements for that capturing of the television in the 1950s. So the theaters really suffered. People were staying home, kind of similar to what's happening now with all the streaming and the post-COVID world. So at the time, in the 1950s, the movie theaters, they had to recreate something that would attract people into, get people in, and that's where we came up with the technology of CinemaScope, and all the movies became widescreen, mainly starting in the 1950s with the CinemaScope experience. So during the 1950s, we had movies, big musical numbers, Singing in the Rain, epics like Giant. We had, again, another musical, American in Paris, the war classic Bridge on the River Kwai, Vertigo by Alfred Hitchcock directing. All of these were done in real widescreen, CinemaScope, so people could have that really ultimate movie theater experience. And it did work. It did save a lot of theaters, but then unfortunately, getting into the 60s and 70s, when we started getting hit with a lot of the recession, a lot of it didn't, pan out. We also had, Oklahoma, Rebel Without a Cause, classic Ben-Hur, The Greatest Show on Earth, the big production Greatest Show on Earth, and the religious classic The Robe, all done in CinemaScope during the 1950s. So with that, let's really talk about kind of a little more upbeat topics. But let's talk about what's still standing, what's kind of like being in the process of being renovated. We were very fortunate in the 1960s because the Commission of Chicago Landmarks was established in 1968, and a lot of protection came where there was a lot more review of buildings that were historically significant, and focus was on preservation and trying to spare a lot of the old theaters from the wrecking ball. It's kind of a sad story in a way to look at some of the theaters that we've been talking about in the movie palaces. They got torn down for business reasons, like parking lots and grocery chains, and there needs to be investment in money. So now, thankfully, we have this Chicago landmark, and they're preserving the living landmarks of Chicago. So let's kind of see what's going on here. So great news is we've got the Music Box Theater, 3733 South Park. Since its opening in 1929, this charming theater has kind of preserved a vintage allure while evolving with the times. It has ornate decor, plush seating, state-of-the-art projection systems. It offers a unique cinematic experience and transports audiences back to the golden age of film. One of the key successes to the theaters that I'm going to talk to you about now in this preservation bit is pretty much the passions that the neighborhoods had, as well as the owners, a lot of family ownership of these movies that basically have really made these movies flourish. And the theater, the Music Box, kind of dedicated to showcase a variety of films ranging from independent gems to beloved classics. And now at Christmas time, as you might know or not know, they do a great classic, Wonderful Life and White Christmas double feature where they bring in the full-blown organ and they recreate the experience in the movie theater, what it was like back when those movies came out. They have Christmas Carol sing-alongs as part of it. Santa Claus Comes. Just a great traditional Music Box theater experience that has become a tradition in Chicago. Another one is the Davis Theater, which is shown in the center there. This one's at 4614 North Lincoln, and it was established in 1918, and it was originally named the Pershing Theater, but it became a beloved spot for a lot of local Chicagoans who flocked to watch a lot of innovative films. the Fortunately enough too, with the community and with the people running the theater, they underwent a significant renovation in 2016. They invested $5 million in this theater, and it creates its vintage charm while integrating a lot of modern amenities. Now they put in a full bar in there, full service restaurant, to make a really movie experience with a lot of those, traditional movies or independent movies. Another one is in the Logan Theater. That's a recent picture of it over there on the right. But this is at 2646 North Milwaukee, and it was originally known as the Paramount Theater. But the Logan Theater kind of boasts a long-standing reputation for excellence in showing different screen cinemas and theater experiences all the way since 1915. Um, there's a family called the Vesopoulos family, and the son, Chris Vesopoulos, who was a family member, he's kind of dedicated his life to actually sustaining this beloved movie. The family supported it through the economic downturns. They've been working with the Logan community, all through all types of issues going on with Chicago. But they've recently created updates and they've renovated it, and it's now a full venue to kind of thrive in a four-screen cinema. They've got four screens in there, and the theater is kind of Art Deco. It's the city's longest running movie theater. And one of the reasons this piece of Chicago history is still around is, again, because of the community, the residents, as well as the family ownership. The Davis Theater out, you can see kind of the glazed terracotta exterior features of the classic and kind of Romanesque inspired architecture design. Another one is you can kind of see the Beaux Arts architecture on this one, but this is Landmark Century Cinema. It's at 2828 North Clark Street. And this one kind of lives up to its name. It's kind of in the Lakeview neighborhood. This one offers 7-screen multiplexes. It creates a distinctive cinematic experience right there in the heart of that Lakeview area. It kind of primarily showcases kind of independent and foreign language movies, and sometimes popular Hollywood releases are there as well. But it ensures that the film lovers can always discover something intriguing and very thought-provoking there. And beyond the movies, the cinema actually is enhancing the experience with a lot of amenities. They've included some unique concession areas, and they've brought in a lot of variety of like premium food choices, along with your traditional fresh, your popcorns or your hot dogs. But there's also a bar in here. It kind of provides a refined space to enjoy a pre-movie drink or engage in a lot of post-film discussion. And another historic theater is the Riviera Theater that's still operating today. The 2,500 seat theater basically has kind of a signature French Renaissance style, and the scale of the project kind of sets it apart from many Chicago theaters. And in 1975, the Riviera, with the decline in the movies, they created a huge concept transformation to create this as a well-known national concert venue under the Jam Productions, and it began promoting a lot of pop and rock concerts at the Riviera. And they've been working on the insides. They've been kind of repainting. You got like a psychedelic look here, but here's some of the interiors, a little bit fuzzy because I couldn't go in the theater to take these pictures, but just a beautiful experience to go take in a concert at the Riviera. And pretty much the last movie was shown there in 1983, but still to this day, you can now go and see all of the popular concerts there. We have a couple of movie houses that were kind of converted over the years, and an example was the Gateway Theater at 5216 West Lawrence, and it was one of the largest neighborhood theaters built in the Jefferson Park neighborhood, and it was opened in 1930. And again, it was designed in an atmospheric style with classic Roman-inspired flourishes. It was built for movies. It kind of had a smaller stage, but it remained a very popular theater for decades. But then in 1985, the Polish community the Copernicus Foundation, which was the Polish American Society, they decided to buy the theater and they basically restored it to its original splendor. But in addition, they basically created a huge community complex around it there, which is called the Copernicus Center. And this is what it looks like outside today. Um, they added a now distinctive, it's called the Solidarity Tower up there. You can see it up on the upper right of these pictures. And the Solidarity Towers is kind of a smaller reconstruction of the now demolished clock tower that was once featured in Warsaw's Royal Castle. And it's visible right off the Kennedy Expressway. And today, the Copernicus Center is kind of host to a lot of community gatherings. One of my favorites that we go to is we go to the Taste of Polonia. Every Labor Day, they have a huge festival there with Polish food and a lot of rock concerts. And they keep the theater still operating. They use it mainly for Polish films or different types of documentary films. But the theater's inside of this one. And then we have the State and Lake Theater. The State Lake Theater was right across the street from the Chicago Theater, 190 North State. It opened as a vaudeville house and then became a movie palace. But it does sit across the street from the Chicago Theater, but it's designed in kind of the similar French Renaissance Chicago style. And the theater is kind of grandiose, and it became part of the Bell and Cash chain in 1938. And pretty much it continued all the way through to 1984 when the interiors were purchased, gutted, and converted into the studios for the ABC network, WLS TV. So this is the one where if you walk on State Street, look across the street, you'll see the broadcasting going on there with WLS TV. And the exterior of this building was actually restored to its original 1920s appearance. You can kind of see it pictured there. And it's kind of a very quite impressive bookend to the Chicago Theater across the street. A couple of theaters that are kind of in renovation forming is the Portage. The Portage actually has gone through a lot of life cycles. It's kind of on the landmark now of the most endangered historic places in Illinois. It's elaborate, modern, and neoclassic interiors, cream color finish. There's a huge investment that needs to happen here. There's a lot of people working on it because it's on the most endangered historic place list. They're definitely trying to preserve it. In its heyday, that was the picture there on the left side. Today, it looks like that over right. It's run down. It just needs renovation, but there are some plans to do that. And the last movie we'll talk about here for renovation purposes is the Congress Theater. And this is in kind of Logan Square area. It was built in 1926, and it's also on the National Historic Places. A lot of beautiful architecture. This is what the Congress looked like before. Unfortunately, this is a picture of it today. Graffiti ridden, just a lot of challenges keeping with the update and maintenance. But the real good plan is that actually there's been there's been an $88 million fund that's been approved. This one's going to be renovated probably over the next 2 or 3 years, and you can see it definitely needs to be renovated. And kind of a sad. It's great that it's kind of there, and it's not going to be torn down. And at least we're going to get into some investments with this. So, kind of in closing, I just wanted to kind of do some quotes from some famous directors on kind of the importance of cinema. Steven Spielberg, he basically loves to go to the regular movie theater. He says it's better watching a movie with 500 people making noises than with just a dozen. Martin Scorsese talks about movies touching our hearts, waking our vision, and changing the way we see things. And they open our doors and our minds up. and Christopher Nolan talks about his memories of his movie going experiences and how they really made a whole impact on his um, director and the films that he creates. And the famous Orson Welles has referred to the cinema pretty much having no boundaries. It's kind of a ribbon of dreams. So today I focused on a lot of maybe sad stories of history theaters that are no longer present, but a lot of good updated things when you get people in your communities and your neighborhoods. And one thing that I would like to have you kind of make a note of is next time you go through Chicago, take down some of the addresses or take down some of these locations downtown, and maybe stop from your walk and kind of look up and look at these buildings. But they're just amazing. The detail, the ornament, the details around them. And that's it for my presentation, Aaron.
Thank you, Ken. If you have any questions for Ken, please type them in the chat and we will get to those. I mean, that is just a wealth of information you gave us on uh, the history. I was gonna say history of films, history of buildings, architecture, history of Chicago. Really fascinating. Thank you so much. And I'm sure all of us recognize at least some of those places around the Chicagoland area. We do have a question that came in already asking, is the Roseland Theater still functioning? It had a large stage and what looked like an organ pit or orchestra pit. I think it had a vaudeville history.
Which theater?
Roseland?
Roseland.
Yeah.
Let me see. That one didn't come up in my updates. Let's see. It was converted into a retail space, but it closed in 2018. There's been some proposals that were aired to possibly reignite it in 2022. It is not torn down, it's there, but it's not operating. So it's like one of the theaters that we talked about, like the Portage Theater or the Congress Theater, of trying to get the neighborhood and community kind of rallied about kind of renovating some of these and trying to figure out the funds to do it.
All right. Yeah, good question there. Here's another one. Great presentation. The Tivoli Theater in Downers Grove still has an organ player on Mondays for the After Hours Film Society's movies. That's cool.
Yes, there's so in Downers Grove there is a great famous uh, movie theater, and it is called the Tivoli. It's a different Tivoli than the one that I was talking about in Chicago, but the one in Downers Grove, it's another example of when you have your community or you have the ownership really invest and try to create kind of contributions to keeping these theaters going. There's a great example of one there in Downers Grove. They've completely renovated that one.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds fun. What they're currently doing there on Mondays. Cool. Thanks for that
Yeah.
info. Here's another question. Ken mentioned only 1 to 2 theaters in the South Side. Were there more?
Um, yes. So the south side of I think it was more of a decision based on development, but pretty much the focus was on the north side as well as the downtown areas. There were a few on the south side, and it was hard. It's pretty much hard. Like you could go on and talk about a lot of theaters. I mean, there's like huge lists of movie theaters. There is one down there that came up, and I think it's the Central Theater. It's got a lot of history there, and the Central Theater got converted over into a place now that does kind of religious community projects, but it's not an operating theater today. But not as much dominance in the movie theaters on the south side as there was on the north and the center, or movies that have or or the movie palaces that have kind of gone through the test of time to really become a historic uh, symbol of Chicago.
Wow, you kind of amaze me with all this little extra info you just are holding on to there. And honestly, like I was feeling like your presentation covered so many buildings and so many really interesting architectural theaters, and yet we still have more comments here about other ones. Here's someone saying, are there more in the suburbs like the Pickwick in Park Ridge? And then someone else says, what happened to the Commodore Theater on Irving Park Road?
Well, the suburbs is a whole different topic, but yes, absolutely right. Some of the suburbs are doing really wonderful things with their community theaters, and a lot of them are just as old. Depending on how old the suburbs are. The focus of this presentation was really trying to tie into the kind of the city, the city limits a little bit. Um, I don't know much. What was the theater that was mentioned? The
Commodore Theater on Irving Park Road.
Commodore Theater. Let me look at that one here. Bear with me a second. So that would have been on the list of so when I talk about Balaban and Cats, um, the theaters that I'm talking about are kind of only a handful of all of the theaters that were in Chicago. So here's an example where that was on the list of Balaban and Cats, but because they had over, I think it's like 80 movie theaters in the Chicago area. You can go on and on. But I just looked up here. Um, Unfortunately, the Commodore in the 80s, it said it fell into disrepair. It began to be used for illegal activities, whatever that means. Um, the Commodore was demolished in the 1990s. So kind of a similar fate. It kind of made it through the 70s and 80s. It wasn't doing very well, and it was left there, not operating, out of business. And then they finally made a decision to kind of tear it down back in the 1990s. It's really sad because I think that a lot of listeners, and at least myself too, if you grew up in Chicago, or if you're familiar with some of these theaters, some of the greatest moments of your life growing up were going to the theaters and seeing like fantastic movies. Me, I know one of the first movies I saw was like The Sting, and that was at the Mulford Theater, and a lot of these unfortunate business models and the lack of investment and just looking at it from a numbers game really closed down a lot of these old theaters and demolished them for other business growths, like mainly like grocery stores or parking lots or parking garages, and you really lose all of that architecture. And it's really refreshing to me, the research that I'm doing, coming across what the societies are doing, trying to create these as living landmarks, like the Uptown Theater or some of the other theaters. And if more of that would happen in the different communities, I think that would really help.
Absolutely. And to perfect about to that sentiment you were just expressing, the next person says, how about the Nortown Theater on Western and the Lincoln Village Theater? I remember waiting in line to see Saturday Night Fever at the latter. So that would be at the Lincoln Village Theater.
Lincoln Village Theater. Hang on a second. Let me take a look.
Yes, wonderful memories.
So it says the first movies to show at the Lincoln Village, if this was the same one, was in the 80s. Um, it was showing like Karate Kid, Batman, the original Batman.
So this person watched Saturday Night Fever.
Oh, Saturday Night Fever. Okay. So this the theater. So that theater again is it just ended up going out of business in 2000 in the 2008, and it just says that it was closed. And that's all it says. So I'm guessing it might still be there. It wasn't maybe torn down, but I'm what I'm thinking is what I've noticed is it probably got converted over to a retail store. Um, a lot of them
Sure.
are getting converted over to like little retail stores instead of being torn down. They just don't operate as theaters anymore.
Sure. Well, good thing for us that you are able to share all this information with us before they all disappear. It's wonderful, wonderful
Yeah, a
photos
lot, a
that you
lot, a lot
showed.
that we talked about, a lot we talked about did has they have disappeared, right? And but the good news is there's a lot of good ones there that are still there.
Absolutely, yes. Um, well, I don't see any more questions. Just to finish this up, we have some very kind person says, on a 1 to 10 scale, this lecture was an 11. So thank you for that.
Thank
And I
you,
agree.
thank you,
And and then someone else does ask if they'll get a recording link after tonight, and yes, you will. Everyone who registered will get an emailed link, hopefully tomorrow. That will happen. And another person says, really great, thank you. And I thank all of you for attending. You should probably receive a Zoom survey. So please fill that out. We really keep track of your comments and your feedback. So that would be really helpful to us if you filled that out. And Ken, this was awesome. Thank you so much for,
thank you, everybody.
yeah, thank you. And we'll see you again for the next
Yeah, have a good
interesting
night.
topic.
Yeah, okay, bye.
All right. Have a great evening, everyone. Good night.